Okay, everyone. Thank you for coming along this evening, and thank you to Rapha for hosting us. Can everyone hear me okay at the back? Yeah, you can hear me? Okay, cool. My name's Steuart. I'm the COO of FLOWBIO. We like to call ourselves a human performance technology company. So we build biosensor technology that kind of sits on your skin like this. We aim to translate your body's natural language into insights and data that can inform your well-being and your athletic performance. And today I'm joined by also our head of physiology, Sophie Killer, and Alan, who is going to introduce himself now as well. There you go.
Hi, thank you very much. I know quite a few of you here, I think, already. So my name's Alan Murchison. I run a business called Performance Chef, and I do sports nutrition for athletes. So background is Michelin Star chef, did that for many years. And about 10 years ago, I started getting into sport and work with recreational athletes and elite athletes across the globe. Main role at the moment is working with specialised factory racing. So we look after their Olympic athletes across the World Cup circuit. And we also provide nutritional services for what I refer to normal athletes, you know, people who've got jobs in real life, and try and demystify how to perform well around food.
Sophie, do you want to give a bit about you?
I have a PhD in exercise metabolism, and I work in elite sport alongside working with FLOWBIO. So my background is in team sports and in athletics. I worked a couple of Olympic Games and a good few seasons in Premier League football, which probably isn't worth talking about that much tonight. But lots of experience working with endurance athletes. So I came across FLOWBIO about 1.5 years ago and was really excited by the technology and what that could bring to practitioners and researchers in the field. So yeah, really excited to talk about that bit tonight, and also obviously to have a chat with the most amazing performance chef out there.
Okay, so we thought we'd be clever, and rather than just have a kind of bunch of questions that we're going to ask, we've got this app. Doug, I don't know if you can put the link to this app up on the slide. Is it at the top? Okay, sorry. So there's a ask a question. If you type in this URL to your browser, it'll direct you to an app, and you can type your question. If you want to start adding those questions, you can then vote on each other's question, and then we'll have a kind of populated list of questions that we can run through tonight. But just to get going, Alan, I think the question at the top of the list here is, what's the most unusual thing you've seen an athlete add to their diet, maybe most recently?
Right, that's a fairly easy one. Innsbruck World Road Championships 2018. There was a young rider called Georgie who rides for DSM, and she was a junior at the time. Now, bearing in mind, at World Road Championships, you've got junior riders, under 23s, and seniors. So when the seniors are there, you've got all these superstars that you see on television, and you know, you've got Lizzie Deignan walking around the room, and you've got all the Sky Boys at the time. And there was this quite humble little Welsh girl, or very rangy Welsh girl, who is national time trial champion, and she asked for the morning of the race, World Time Trial Championships, chicken curry and rice. She'd always gone well off chicken curry and rice. I said, do you know your start time's 8:15? She went, yeah. I said, so you want chicken curry and rice at 5:15 in the morning? She went, yep. She podiumed and got a contract for DSM. So that was probably the most unusual one we've ever had, and yeah, she dines off the back of that one still, that she got a WorldTour contract with chicken curry for breakfast.
Yeah, I think a lot of athletes are like that. I think my first good race I ever had as a triathlete, I had a fish finger sandwich the night before. So, you know, it was always like, we're going to get the fish finger sandwich.
Yeah, but for her, I think the main thing was she was having, the spice would have concerned me, but it was just carbs, protein and fat. And she was having it 3 hours before, so theoretically it was okay, but yeah, still somewhat unusual.
And how do so you got these races all over the world? What, athlete specific diets? How much like kind of? I mean, I think you mentioned you've got athletes from. I I think, where was the country you mentioned earlier?
Well, we have 14 different nationalities.
14 different nationalities. So how do you cater for all their, cultural cuisine needs? Is that something you have to be accounting for?
Yeah, it's good. So things are a little bit different now working mountain bike. So normally if you're working for, say, at World Championships, you're working for a nation. So say if you're working for Great Britain, you'll have British athletes. With mountain bike, it's a little bit different. So we, as Specialized Factory Racing, we've got 6 core athletes, 2 Americans, French, Italian, Swiss and Austrian. So relatively straightforward. But at Worlds this year, we looked after athletes that were underneath the Specialized umbrella, so the family. So we had 2 young guys from Colombia who were part of the development team. We had a Brazilian, we had a Kiwi, a Slovakian, New Zealand. Yeah, we had all sorts. We had 14 nationalities. So what we very much tried to do was just understand the demands of the event and just try to simplify it, because you can't do 14 different nationalities cuisine. So we used to write a menu up every day. We'd put on a WhatsApp group and then we look at the races. So invariably they would all be having rice before races, and then we used to make sure they just had some form of flavoured protein, and then post-race we'd do something like a stir-fried rice noodle dish that they could then adapt accordingly. But the main thing is to get the trust of the athlete and making sure they understand the demands of the event. So theoretically, if you're having rice, pasta or potatoes, it's more or less the same thing. If you're having for breakfast, whether you're having porridge, rice porridge or pancakes, the macros are almost identical. So within the team, we'll have timings that will have one athlete that wants risotto rice cooked in rice milk with white sugar. We'll have another athlete who wants a gluten-free pancake with maple syrup, and somebody else that wants porridge with honey. Now, my scientist friend beside me will tell me that is almost an identical meal, but it depends, do you want to have cold rice porridge in your room? Swiss girls love it, absolutely love it, because they don't have to think about it. It's unemotional eating. The Americans, my God, we'll have maple syrup and hot pancakes, because they're eating with a little bit more of emotional content. So I think once we've got the buy-in and the trust, the macros look after themselves, really.
I've got one, if that's all right. Something that I'm really interested in, because I would just wish more people would do it, but what was it that made you go from fine dining to performance nutrition?
I think it was, I'd fallen out of love with fine dining. If you're doing fine dining, it's all about excellence and it's about passion, and you needed to love doing it every day. And I stopped loving it. I stopped being first one in and last one out, and I wanted to go into another high performance environment. And I like I like the mentality of high performance when you're surrounded by a team that their aspirations are to be the best they can be. In some respects, working in sports is far easier than food, because what's an amazing meal? Like, it could be a dirty burger at 1 o'clock in the morning. It could be a bacon sandwich. It could be a piece of fish on a beach holiday. Like, food's highly subjective. So I went around the room and said to you, right, what's the best meal you've ever had? Quite often it's the company and the environment you're in that dictates that. Whereas with sport, like, I know when I was working with British cycling, unless we were winning, we were failing. And that was it. It was medals. And it wasn't even bronze or silver medals. You'd athletes who'd go to events, if they got silver, there'd be a death by analysis as to why that happened. So sport in some respects is easier, certainly elite sport, but it could be, even for recreational athletes, it could be, I want to complete 100 miles, or I want to do the Rapha Festive 500. Like, we did a load of stuff last year on the Festive 500, and everybody had different goals around that. So it was just moving from one high performance environment to another, and then using the skills that I had in that environment and translating them across. So it's the people, it's the environment, it's that constant improvement, and it's that goal setting. And the similarities are the same, but I stopped loving it effectively. Yeah.
Alan, I think we were talking earlier, you were talking about when you moved over to performance nutrition, you start talking about looking into the training peaks and then matching the training peaks data with the nutrition plans. Can you maybe talk us through a bit more about that?
Yeah. So we're often asked about, what can recreational athletes learn from professional athletes? And one of the things that we do is we use training peaks. There's a number of different platforms, and we're all very good now at tracking our metrics. So whether it's through FLOWBIO or WHOOP or training peaks or today's plan. And what essentially we would do is we'd look at the training that an athlete has in a week, and then we would actually put a food plan that sits alongside it. So if you think about people who are not professional athletes, generally, if they work Monday to Friday, sweeping generalisation in an office, they might have an hour to train Monday to Friday and then backfill the weekends. So you get in on a Monday night, you might just sit on the trainer for an hour and exercise. It might not be training. That's very different than if you were going on and doing 2 by 20 minutes at threshold, or you were doing 40-second reps with 20 seconds recovery. They are obviously much more stressful on your body. So what we would do is look at a plan and then put food in alongside that plan that would either help you repair, recover, or fuel that individual training session. And the same thing applies to, you know, elite athletes. And I think if you take nothing out of tonight other than apply your load and the food required and have the two things that sit side by side, it's quite easy to do if you use a Garmin or a Wahoo, and you've got an app like Training Peaks is a free app that you can download. So if you move, if you're on a bike or run or whatever, there'll be some sort of calorie burn, there'll be a deficit, and you can quite easily work that out as to what you require energy in, energy out.
Does anyone else here use Training Peaks?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is,
Do you,
yeah.
do you use I take it you use Performance Manager and all those features. Do you use it to track your nutrition as well? No?
No.
Macros, none of that?
It's quite easy to do. The two things that you can do that are inexpensive is MyFitnessPal is a really good app that's got an algorithm on it. So if you put in that you have, say, a KFC, it will tell you what's in a KFC, or Lloyd Grossman's pasta sauce with 100 grams of pasta. It knows what it is. And then if you, Training Peaks, for example, say you went out and did 2 hours and you just took pictures for Instagram, you know, you just went and chatted, that will have a deficit. That will be very different than you went out and did like a 2-hour chain gang that you got hammered, or you went and did like a 50-mile time trial. Those would be very different. So you can quite often work out what the load is, and then it's a matter of, essentially, you need more carbohydrate the harder you go. And that's the other thing, is that theoretically, carbs are king, you know, and if you're doing anything on a scale of 1 to 7, which is typical training zones, if you go above a level 2, you're going to require carbohydrate, or somebody's going to be coming to pick you up in a taxi. And we've got a good case study on that, if you wanted to talk about that, about how you could do it. So there's a very good study, and I've actually written it out. What is it? Oh, a cut study. So you'd have heard of a gentleman called Chris Froome. So Chris Froome in 2018 did something that was quite spectacular on stage 19 of the Giro d'Italia. This is real nerdy stuff. So basically, 3 weeks into a race, Chris Froome attacked the peloton and went on an 80-kilometre madness. And he destroyed the field and just disappeared off the front. Now, bear in mind, you're 3 weeks into a big race. And he went. And when he went, if you actually look at it, if you're a real pedant or you're bored one night, look at it on YouTube. And he's got one bottle on his bike. Why would you attack with one bottle? But what he'd done is he trained his gut to take on between 80 to 100 grams of carbohydrate per hour. Now, as a 68-kilo athlete, at that time, that was really high. It's moved on since then. So, okay, well, how did he do that? You go back in January that year, okay, so January, he did a really famous ride called Emptying the Tank on Strava. So he did 271 kilometers solo at 45 kilometers an hour. Right? Now, the sports scientist in you will tell you there's no physical benefit of doing that in January for a race in May. None. You can't keep that form going. Bear in mind, he did 300k on the 2 days either side of that as well. So he did it fatigued. So what Froome was doing was he was training his gut to take on 80 to 100 grams of carbohydrate per hour. That's what he's doing. There's no benefit of doing that. Like 45k an hour for 270k on your own. And he knew that was a box he was ticked. So I think, again, something you can do as athletes is you can say, well, my event might be in July. It's going to be hot, it's going to be in Spain. Or it could be, again, Festive 500. You can train your body for the demands of that event. And that's where tech, like say, like FLOWBIO or Whoop or Training Peaks can really help you, because, you know, if you took, say, a 60-kilo athlete, being romantic about it, and you took 100 grams of carbohydrate per hour, you're going to have issues if you've not got your body used to it, or you've had lots of fibre and lots of fat the night before. Again, let's exaggerate for effect. You've gone out, had a spicy curry, loads of fruit and veg, and then you start taking 100 grams of carbohydrate per hour, and you're out in white shorts. You can have issues. But you can build up. And now WorldTour riders are quite often sub 70 kilos, taking on 110 grams of carbs per hour for 6 hours. day in, day out. So you can train your body to do that. And I think, again, look at the demands of events. And as you'd have a bike set up, you know your saddle height, you know your bike fit, you know your stem length, you know all that. Do exactly the same thing with your food and lay it out the night before. And, you know, other bit of advice is every 20 minutes do something. Eat or drink, and just keep topping it up and start straight away. Because again, you get athletes that go out for 3 hours with 500 mils on the bike. Why? You know, so that's one of the things I think is really important. And just keep notes on something like Training Peaks. Keep a little diary, and you'll soon see a pattern, and you'll find the sweet spot of what works for you.
Just to add to that, my experience working with endurance athletes, how we actually practically put that into a training program. I can usually negotiate one session a week that can be primarily a nutrition focus. So it should be performed at as close to race pace as possible, ideally for as long as possible. But obviously, if you're racing, you know, a couple 100 miles, then you're not going to do that every week. But pick a training session that mimics some aspect of that race, and then the whole focus of that session is basically about eating as much carbohydrate as you possibly can. So initially, you're going to have some stomach issues. Potentially, you're not going to perform at your absolute best. But if you can commit to that one session a week for about 2 to 3 months, we tend to see the really positive adaptations. And I think people forget that the gut is as adaptable as a muscle. And what you're trying to do is upregulate the glucose or carbohydrate transporters in the gut to enable you to absorb it faster. You can absolutely train your gut just like a muscle, but it's a commitment to doing that type of training. So I find most athletes are happy to do one session a week, perhaps if it's just one session every 2 weeks, with the primary aim of just eating as much as possible of carbohydrate. Works really, really well. Clearly, you have to factor that into your overall energy intake for that day or for that 48-hour period. It might not be the kind of session that you have a massive recovery meal afterwards if you're interested in maintaining your body composition, but that will have a positive adaptation on your gut that will pay dividends in race.
Okay, so I think this leads to the next question. There's quite a few coming through about what does a pre-race carbo loading day actually look like. So could you maybe break down what a meal plan looks like for an athlete the day before a major stage race, or at the start of a tour, or any big event really?
Yeah. We're huge fans of reducing the amount of fibre. Like a low-res, low-fibre diet actually pays huge dividends, especially for one-off events, because theoretically you can have up to 2 kilos of undigested fibre in your gut. So what we effectively will do, and we trialled this last year, I was working with SRAM, and we were on a race simulation camp down in the south of Spain, and we had 14 athletes, and we reduced fibre for 2 days. So effectively we're having rice porridge. Rice has got white rice has got no fibre in it at all. Pasta, say for example, whole wheat pasta will have 12 grams of fibre per 100 grams. So it's got no fibre in it, with cooked in coconut and rice milk with white sugar. Lunch would be grilled salmon with rice noodles, and dinner would invariably be some sort of lean protein. Grilled courgette, because courgette is low in fibre, and then grilled chicken, and with plain tomato sauce. Again, that's low in fibre. And then dessert would be watermelon with honey and Greek yogurt. Again, watermelon's low in fibre. So you can, you cherry pick around it. And out of the 14 girls we had there, 10 of them noticed significant difference in how they felt. They felt lighter, they felt leaner, their weight was better. But also water retention was better. Our main rider, she won't mind me saying it, was Cassia, who was our lead rider. Cassia was a renowned, how do I put this by? She'd go to the toilet quite a lot when she was out riding. We had another name for it, but I can't use it. And she'd be 20 minutes in riding, she'd be stopping for a pee. Then 40 minutes in, and that stopped.
At least she stopped.
She stopped. Yeah, she stopped. She didn't do it on the bike, which again is quite common in professional sport. So, and she was a lot better. So it's something that's worth practicing. It doesn't form part of a healthy long-term diet, because what you're taking out of your diet is all the stuff that's good. Fruit, veg, nuts, seeds, grains, or pulses. They're all really high in fibre, which is great for you. So we would always advise to reduce fibre for the 48 hours prior to a race. And then again, minimum of 3 hours before, have a plan. So for example, look at when your race is and then work backwards. So say your event is at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That's quite tricky. So I would have, say, rice porridge, which is using rice, or like a risotto, whatever you want, or rice pudding in the morning, and then I'd have white bread toasted with some ham and cheese at lunch, or either white, like really gluten-free pasta. Could be something you could have as well, because that's invariably rice-based. at lunch, and then just top up with carb drink ahead of it. It's not glamorous, but that works. Low-res diets or low-fiber diets over a long period of time are not healthy and not advised, to be honest. So that's what we would do. But don't go crazy. Don't go like absolutely mad, because your body can only absorb so much, and I think you'll end up having more problems than you weren't. Over stage races, female athletes will do the math on this, actually go and look at it. The benchmarks for a stage race for female athletes are 8 to 10 grams of carbohydrate per kilo of body weight per day. That's so much. Male athletes are looking at 10 to 12 grams of carbs per kilo of body weight per day. And if you measure that out in pasta, potatoes or rice, it will blow your mind. And that's why they have maybe rice for breakfast, they'll have pasta for breakfast, they'll have rice cakes on the bike. They're just trying to mix up the amount of carbohydrate they have. But just again, try and think of the 48 hours before are probably the key points, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It was a really popular technique with British athletics as well, partly for reducing GI distress, but also we did see quite significant weight loss. So yeah, rapid weight loss technique that wasn't withholding energy or involving any really unpleasant techniques that you probably read about that are more associated with kind of fighting. But yeah, really nice way of losing a kilo and a half just before a race, and also not feeling bloated, which is really important to track and field athletes that have to run around a track basically in a bikini. They want to look slim and feel good, and rapid weight loss techniques really help there too with the low fibre.
Can you elaborate maybe on, I know you spoke a lot about fibre and kind of dropping that down, but can you elaborate more on probably an older technique, but like carb loading, how you should structure that carbohydrate build up before an event?
I think the thing with that is, you've got to be a little bit careful, because your body will store water and carbohydrate in equal measures. So it's almost like robbing from Peter to pay Paul. I don't dramatically increase it, because I start that process. I start the fueling process as soon as a race. So if I was going to do, say, a 100-mile time trial, which is 3.5 to 4 hours, I start the carb top up after 20 minutes, and I never stop it. I just keep it going. So I don't go mad, because I think it's negated, because that feeling bloated, kind of heavy or lethargic, and you often hear about it in Ironman races. You know, people, I feel lethargic and really heavy, combined with a taper and then increasing that volume. I'm not sure. I just try to have carbohydrate breakfast, lunch and dinner the day before and the morning of the race, but don't go nuts. But just start topping the tank up. It's about like if you were driving from London to Edinburgh, all right, you wouldn't wait until you get to Newcastle before you start thinking about fueling the car. You'd almost start topping it up almost immediately if you could. And I think that's the main thing to do, is if every 20 minutes you're topping it up, I don't think you need to be carrying so much carbohydrate, because you're just going to feel crap.
And also the effect of the taper. Remember, you're not training as much, so that's storing your glycogen anyway. There's some really nice research showing that almost the taper alone enables you to fully restore your glycogen without, like you said, having to eat so much that you feel rough.
Is there instances where, I don't know, say it's a mountain stage where athletes will purposely kind of deload, so to speak, run the stores down and dehydrate themselves a little bit? Do they kind of, I understand, like, say if you're in a marathon, for example, it can almost be beneficial to be slightly dehydrated in the last 5 kilometers where you're trying to squeeze some performance out. Do you get orders from the performance directors to say, look, we need to make sure this athlete's set this way, and we need to customize the plan to suit those needs?
It's a really good question, because if you actually see on mountain stages how much time people lose, because quite often they can't get feeds in the last stages of races, and you've seen it with, I think we had it in Froome, with one of the tours, that he got a penalty because I think it was Richie Porte had to give him a gel because he lost his legs. And you can lose minutes and minutes, and certainly with marathons. I got a good friend who's a GB marathon runner, and her coach was this is quite nerdy, a guy called Richard Neuricher, and she was training for the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow, and he did an analysis of the last 5K of marathons, championship marathons. That's not big city marathons, and if you saw the tail off in the last 5K, because they're just not eating and drinking enough, and the tail off was massive. Whereas if you race a championship marathon, it starts slow and it builds. Whereas a city centre marathon, they're evenly paced. So it's a very, very different race. So I think it is something that people will do, but it's such a tight line, because you're going full gas. What do you you go with that person? And it's not relative to most people, but I think it's really dangerous because you're not thinking about that day, you're thinking about the following day and what's coming after. So it's something that athletes will do. I've not been aware, certainly in recent times, of athletes being told they need to be a certain weight, but I do know a rider who was a household name who rode for a very good British team who in a stage race was told he had to be fasted for the first 3 hours of Paris-Nice because they weren't happy with his weight during the stage race. They wouldn't give him any carbs for the first 3 hours of a stage race. That's barbaric. And back in the day, it was not unheard of for endurance athletes, certainly cyclists, to go out and do 6 hours with maybe 2 bottles, come in, sleeping tablets, bottle of mineral water and go to bed so they'd miss a meal. Now that is not looking after athlete health and welfare. So I think that type of stuff is archaic and it's very short term. That was quite common weight loss strategy, well documented. So yeah, it's something that's done, but it depends whether you want to complete or compete a marathon. And I think trying to reduce carbohydrate in the final stages is going to end up badly more often than not.
This might be for both of you actually, Sophie, it's your area of expertise, but I think in cycling, how many cyclists are here? How many triathletes are here? Any triathletes? A couple? Yeah, okay. I think we hear a lot about fasted riding, particularly in training and preparation for both to help you burn more fat and also, I guess, simulation of what can happen in stage races where you might have a cyclist they're not near somewhere they can get a feed. Is that something that is quite common across all the teams? And is that common among all the training plans? It seems to be something that is recommended.
I'll comment from a research perspective and then you can comment from an applied perspective, shall I? So the research is quite clear that if you want to optimize performance, you just can't be fasted if you're expecting to work at that kind of rate that's really burning carbohydrate, which is pretty much anything above 50-60%. So yeah, if you're running a marathon at 7 hours, then sure, like you're not going to be busting through carbohydrate. But for the kind of cycling events and triathlon events that you guys are doing, yeah, you're burning carbohydrate. And first and foremost, you need to think about the fuel that your body needs to deliver the performance. But there is some research, well, there's some really nice research to suggest there's nice training adaptations to be had about exercising in a fasted state. And I'm sure you guys will have read about this kind of stuff, but the kind of benefits you can get from exercising fasted, whether that's going out first thing in the morning or actually not eating throughout the day before an evening session, which is 100 times harder than just going straight in the morning, in terms of optimizing your ability to burn fat. But just be mindful if you commit to that kind of program that you are going to start inhibiting your ability to burn carbohydrate. So if your race is reliant on carbohydrate fueling, you need to be really clever about how you might be able to get both of those kind of sessions into a day. So it might be that you wake up and do a fasted session in the morning. It hurts. I mean, have a black coffee. The caffeine will definitely help without interfering with that metabolic process. Don't expect to get a PB, but commit to getting that adaptation. And then recover, refuel, and then in the evening do a session that you've had a really good pre-exercise carbohydrate meal. And then within that day, you've optimized that fat metabolism pathway, but you've also had a session that you've been able to fuel the body appropriately and get something really good out of it. So from a scientific perspective, it's worth considering, but really think about your race. And if your race requires you to be an excellent fat burner because you're going marathon de sable for days and low intensity, fine. But if you're expecting to climb up a mountain as quick as you can on your bike, then carbohydrate is king, like you said.
Yeah. And the other thing as well is I do it and I'm miserable. It's awful. Like, I'm so grumpy when I've not eaten. And the other thing you've got to think about is running down your immune system with it as well, because if you're going out fasted, you're putting so much stress on your body. One thing we have done with athletes is, say, do an afternoon session or early evening session, then have a meal that's predominantly protein-based, minimal carbohydrate, and then the next morning maybe do 90 minutes. But I don't go outside. I do it on the turbo because I know if I get to 90 minutes, no carb, I start getting a bit delirious. So that's one way of doing it is, so hard session, meal is protein and fat, no carbs, like literally keep the carbs out of it, and then the next day do a morning session, straight up, grumpy as hell, on the turbo, and then get it done before you've seen anybody and upset them with how unpleasant you are. That would be the thing. But also just be real careful. People often say fasted sessions. Right? A session is by default hard. You cannot do a hard session, say 1 to 7, go above 2, you need carbs. There's no such thing as a fasted, I can't do that fasted session. All right, you're driving from London to Edinburgh, you've got no fuel in the tank, you'll get to them 25 and you'll conk out. It's exactly the same thing. So don't ever try to do a fasted session, because it doesn't, there's no such thing.
I think, I mean, if I think back to being an athlete, we're always just eating enough. You're trying to be as light as possible. I don't think there was an evening that went by where I wasn't suffering from cramps. Like, cramps used to be the bane of my life. And it's actually one of the reasons I got involved with FLOWBIO, because I really understood this problem. Some of the research that was there was, right, you need to optimal electrolytes and so on and so forth. And I just wondered, how do you fit, like, for someone like me who was getting cramps all the time, I never considered an optimal rehydration strategy. Is that something that you consider with athletes now?
Well, yeah, definitely is. That's a nice lead into talking about the flow patch. But yes, so exercise-induced cramping, I'm sure you guys have either experienced that or know people that do really suffer from cramping. Some people don't, but some people definitely do, and it seems to be very individual. The consensus for why we get these exercise-induced cramping is not really confirmed. The highly likelihood for most people is that it's an electrolyte imbalance. So therefore wearing something like the flow patch, when you can actually monitor real time or retrospectively look back at the end of the session to see how much sodium you have lost, to enable you to obviously rehydrate appropriately, but perhaps learn more about your body to prepare your bottles best for those next long rides, is really, really valuable. But also, some people won't get cramping because of that. You know, you could take a load of electrolytes and still suffer at night time, perhaps when you're supposedly recovering those awful nighttime cramps that you also get in pregnancy. Lovely. But for some athletes, it might just be that the muscle's undertrained. So there's many things that can contribute to cramping, but certainly one thing that's easy to tick off is assessing your sodium losses, matching that, taking the electrolytes that we know that we need to replace that and to prepare best for the session is a really good option to tick off for sure.
Yeah, I was, so I got involved with FLOWBIO. Stefan, what's Stefan within the company? Founder. Co-founder is one of our clients, a busy guy, triathlete, and I suffered really badly with cramps because I used to do 100-mile time trials a lot. I'd always get to 90 minutes and I'd suffer knowing a lot about it. So if you go on Precision Hydration, and there are no sponsors or whatever, they've got a lot of case studies, of which I did one of them, and they looked at the amount of pH 1500 or whatever it would be that certain athletes took in certain environments. And I went from having cramps at 100 miles TTs that used to start about 90 minutes and get worse and worse, then started using a protocol that I used to have, Precision Hydration pH 1500 without carbs the night before the event, the morning of the event, have it with carbs, and then have every second bottle would have carbohydrate. And I went from struggling to break 4 hours for 100 miles, which for me was relatively slow, to 3:36 for 100 miles, and that was in 27 degrees. So it does make a huge difference. And with the riders that we work with, we have to be really reactive, because we could go from, I was telling the guys earlier, you know, we were in Germany and it was pissing rain, it was 10 degrees and they weren't sweating at all. We went to Andorra at 2,000 plus meters and 38 degrees. Then they went to America and it was like 4 degrees. And each of those will have certain difference. So that electrolyte protocol is something that we work on with athletes. But Precision Hydration has got some really good tools on the website, and it's inexpensive and it's good to try. And they can do sweat tests and all sorts of stuff. So I think it's worth looking at. And then certain products like, say, Science and Sport, that they have a product but it hasn't got that much electrolyte in it. It tastes good, but that's better than nothing. But for some people that's enough. For me, I need loads. So
was that testing that enabled you to know that you needed loads, or was that white lines on your black shorts, or just intuitive?
It was a mixture of white lines, but also just trial and error. I just couldn't get rid of the cramps, and say there wasn't enough stuff, enough goodness in, say, Science and Sport, which I was using. So I went to, say, pH 1500, which was their highest load. I went to that, and then suddenly it disappeared overnight. Just literally disappeared. And now I can, you know, cycle in really warm conditions for many hours. But I take salt tablets out with me, and I also always have sachets of of electrolyte with me because I can feel it coming on. It's just a little slight tingling in my toes. Starts in my toes and then works its way up to my calves and then my hamstrings, and it's savage. So yeah, it's worth looking at.
I think we're running out of questions on the app. Have anyone got any questions to ask Alan? Yeah.
Yeah, got another one.
Go on.
Sorry, was that someone behind me?
Sorry, no, you go for it. Oh, sorry, yeah. I tell you what, why don't we go from the back to the front and then we can do it that way. Okay, go for it.
Me, I was going to ask you, you talked about a lot of endurance races. I was wondering if you can speak a bit about shorter stuff, so things like cyclocross.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. No, it's good. So with the mountain bike world, which is really cool, I enjoy working in it, they do a 20-minute race. So how it works in World Cups is the top 40 riders, great concept. The top 40 riders have a smash fest on a Friday night. So top 40 riders in the world have a 20-minute full gas effort on a Friday night. That determines the first 5 rows of the grid for the World Cup race, which has normally got 160 athletes in it. So if you're not in the top 40, you might not even see the start of the race. And there's a really good Rapha athlete, a girl called Magali Rochette, who is an amazing woman, and she's trying to get to the front of the grid mountain bike. And where the hell were we? We're in Brazil. And the race went, I think she started 110th. And after the first 5 minutes, she was lapping within a few seconds of the podium, but the race had gone. So that 20-minute all-out effort is important. And I race a lot of time trials. I love racing 10-mile time trials. So for me, that's 18 odd minutes for 10 miles. So the same principles apply. I don't obviously carry fuel on the bike, but I had a race the other day. I did low fiber protocol the day before. I had rice porridge, I had white bread, and then I was drinking carb drink absolutely before it. So exactly the same principle with it. But again, probably the most interrupted post that I've done on Instagram, which is the font of all knowledge for everything, because if you want to know, never mind about science, just Instagram's where it's at, was at the World Cyclocross Championships last year. And I did an analysis of what did Tom Pidcock and Marianne Vos do that nobody else did. And it was fascinating. So you think Marianne Vos is the greatest cyclist we've seen. Modern era, all right, you can take all these romantic ideals of the Badger and Eddie Merckx and all this, but in modern day, Marianne Vos is the boss. And they've gone from racing in Northern Europe, where it's cold and it's wet and it's windy, they've gone to America, and it's like 20 odd degrees. And Marianne Vos did something that was really clever. She had a bottle on her bike. And every single lap, she came to start-finish fit, and she looked at Lysander Brandt, and she took a drink and put it back in her cage. And all the best men in the world watched Marianne Vos doing that and didn't copy her. Right, first of all, that's arrogance, and secondly, it's stupidity. And you can say, well, she's the best athlete in the world. She's the best athlete in the world because she adapts her riding and her fueling for the conditions that are required. So you're racing in Belgium, it's freezing cold, it's pissing rain, or it's snowing, it's 2 degrees. You might not need 500 ml of liquid. However, you're in America, it's 22 degrees, she had a bottle on her bike. Also, bearing in mind, our bottle with cage, it's going to be about 650 grams, maybe slightly more. If she asked her mechanic to take 700 grams off the weight of a bike, it wouldn't be able to do it. So she was willing to take that penalty. Pidcock did exactly the same the next day. So cyclocross will require fueling if it's warm, but otherwise you should be okay. But same principles apply, get the carbs in. Theoretically, 20 to 40 to 60 minute effort, if you're hydrated and carb to the eyeballs, you should be absolutely fine. But then again, science would say that there's even benefits of having carbohydrate rinse. Just rinsing carbs around in your mouth can have a benefit. So if it's warm, would you do an hour full gas efforts without drinking in training?
I mean, I had fun made out of me because I did have a water bottle.
Yeah.
Cage on my cross bike. People were pointing at me when I was
Yeah.
going to lift it up the stairs because I had the
Well,
cage on.
and nobody noticed that Marianne Vos did it.
Yeah, there you go.
Nobody noticed. Nobody noticed. And I spoke to Magali after that race. I think she came 9th. I said, "Did you have a bottle?" She went, "No." I said, "When did you get thirsty?" About 25 minutes in. One of the best riders in the world, did everything perfectly. The bikes, the tire setup, the tire pressures were great. It's 20 odd degrees. You know, so I would say, and also you recognize in an individual, if you took 10 athletes, they're all going to have slightly different sweat rates. They're all going to require slightly more. And if it works for you, you'd never ever do an hour full gas without drinking or eating in training. Never. You wouldn't do it. Try doing it on the turbo. You wouldn't. And what you should also look at is if you look at zones, say you're training with power, which a lot of people can do quite easily. If you start taking carbohydrate, see what happens to your zones. See if your zones, as opposed to being the bottom of the zone, start creeping up. And as opposed to being able to do whatever that number is, if it's 250, 200, 400 watts, see by taking carbohydrate and fluid if those numbers increase, and you will find a sweet spot. So short races do exactly that. My favourite race is a sub 20-minute race, so I'm with you. And look at Voss, look at last year's World Cyclocross, or look at my Instagram. I did a post on it, it's fascinating. And people go, oh, but she couldn't shoulder her bike. She was putting her bike on the shoulder to go up about 20 steps. Didn't make any difference. So, yes.
Agreed.
You got a question? Yeah? No? I thought you had one.
Me,
Yeah.
I can't see where you're looking.
Oh, sorry.
I was going to ask, I played around with using a Super Sapien device last year, sorry if that's a competitor of yours, but I was looking at kind of glucose levels before kind of an event, and something I think their sort of training or methodology suggests is if you take a carb and your build-up of glucose is, and then when your body starts releasing insulin, you're on that downward curve, and as soon as you're on that downward curve, that affects your ability, at least at the start of an effort. I was wondering if you can talk about kind of maybe just the science behind that and how an athlete could actually think about how do they time their maybe pre-effort nutrition to kind of optimize that.
You want to go?
Sure.
Go on.
So yeah, we're not a direct competitor because we don't have a needle and we're only looking at fluid at the moment. So happy to answer the question, although you should probably direct it to them. But yeah, it's a very, very interesting tool, the continual glucose monitoring. I think the most amazing thing about it is that we can do it. The part that's lacking is really what we do with it, and they would probably acknowledge that too. But yeah, it's very fascinating to watch, not even during exercise, but just like what happened to you overnight. But you're absolutely right. So the science behind consuming carbohydrate or glucose is that you get an increase in your blood glucose. Your body responds by releasing insulin, which tries to bring it back to a normal range, because obviously it's very dangerous to have high blood glucose for a long period of time. But it gets quite complicated because when you start exercising, if you have high blood glucose at the onset of exercise, then your body will prevent you producing or releasing carbohydrate from your liver, from your muscles, because it thinks you have this high blood glucose. But your muscles then rapidly take that in from the blood glucose into the muscle, so you can end up with very, very low blood glucose. I don't know if you ever observed this in your so that's when you become hypoglycemic, and for some athletes that's when you have very low blood glucose. Some athletes won't notice that, and that's fine, but a lot of athletes will feel terrible if they fall into hypoglycemia. So like stars in the eyes, kind of dizziness, maybe even nausea, is not ideal, and hypoglycemia is quite common, and therefore you really have to think about the timing of carbohydrate pre-exercise. And for some people it might be better to have 5 minutes beforehand, or it might be better to have a half an hour beforehand if you play around with that. I've actually written a paper on that if you're interested in reading it. I think 2010, maybe I can post a link. Explains the whole concept around hypoglycemia. So I think the really cool thing about the Super Sapiens is that you can really learn about your body. You can trial and error that, you can see what's happening, but also don't forget the importance of how it feels, because like I said, some people wouldn't know that they're clinically hypoglycemic, and they feel fine. Others could just be teetering on this kind of threshold for low blood glucose and feel terrible. Obviously, the quickest way to come back from that is to take some carbohydrate, and a gel goes into the body really fast, and you did touch on carbohydrate mouth rinses, which basically stimulate sensors on the tongue which tell the brain instantly that carbohydrate's coming, and you can see an improvement in performance, which is really quite amazing. They've done MRI studies where they've seen brain activation instantly from having carbohydrate in your mouth, so like literally swirling it around like a Listerine or something. Can have quite a remarkable instant effect on performance, but remember, you are just tricking the body, so 10 minutes down the line, you're going to plummet again if you've not actually swallowed that carbohydrate. But if you're feeling like that, then taking carbohydrate on quickly can get you out of that hole very fast. Obviously, you're trying to avoid that from happening, and I think that's where the Sapiens patch gives you an opportunity to trial and error that really nicely and just figure it out for yourself. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it was the bit that I was kind of interested in is you talked about going into sort of hypoglycemia, but I think the timing at which I saw was quite pleasant to me, but 30 minutes, sort of I'd have some porridge, I'd see within 30 minutes a spike, and then if I wasn't exercising, I'd start dropping, but started exercising, say, 50 minutes later after eating, I'm on that downward trend, I would feel horrible probably for the first 20, 25 minutes of an effort before my body would actually start responding in a slightly more normal way, I suppose. I didn't know if the downward curve of my body reacting with insulin meant that I would continue sort of normalizing before my body actually went, oh, this carb is here, I'm ready to go again. So,
Thanks. Yeah, so you're absolutely right. You are going to just have a curtailment of the blood glucose because that's just the body's natural way of responding. And if you weren't exercising, that would just come back to a normal level and you would feel all right. So two things. One, play around with the type of food you're having. Obviously, the glycemic index of the carbohydrate will massively influence the spike that you get in the glucose and also the how fast it tails off. So high glycemic index carbohydrates would be your white rice, white pasta, low fiber things. And then, the high GI, and then the low would be the brown rice, the brown pasta. Tend to be the things that you kind of avoid half an hour beforehand. So you can probably expect a bit more of a spike. So you could consider having half a banana the minute you get on the bike, as you're preparing, or you could have a couple of sips from your carbohydrate drink just to try and get you out of that. Yeah, and it's really common. We see it in lots of different sports. Like the first 5 minutes just feel absolutely horrendous, and then without taking carbohydrate, you will feel better. But if you want to avoid that dip, then just some really simple sugar could really help.
The other thing we found with it as well, it's almost death by analysis unless you know what you're doing with it. And we had it again with Canyon SRAM, and the girls all had it, and all they did was spent all their meal times looking at the phone, and they didn't know what to do with the data. So I think from our experience with pro teams, is very few pro teams are using it because they don't have anybody within their infrastructure that actually understands it. And we've got a rider we work with, a girl called Hayley Simmons, who's a PhD chemist, who's a professional cyclist. She's done all the training in it, and she's tried to explain it to me, and if she was speaking a foreign language, I wouldn't understand it. The other thing we found is the foods they're eating with their carbs will impact the reaction. So if they're having chicken and rice, or rice would then have the chicken, that's different, and it's so individual. So I would just say, maybe it's death by analysis and just work out what you can do with it, because if it's just another number to look at, it'd be like saying, well, you need to ride at 107% of your FTP, and you don't have a power meter. What does that mean? So I don't think it's a finished product with regards to support, like what you do with that knowledge. That's just from our experience with it. It's
and that was my experience, why I asked the question.
Yeah.
I got 4 freebies, I was like, let's try it out. But yeah, it's exactly that. What do you do with information?
Yeah, I think the future of nutrition is hopefully going to be in more accurate wearables, because it's fascinating. Like at the moment, we extract athletes from their natural habitat, test them in a lab under completely different circumstances, take that information, give them some feedback, tell them what to do, but then put them back in a completely different training environment. It's just so disconnected, which is why, coming back to FLOWBIO, which is why I think it's just so interesting that we can actually now collect this data in athletes in the field doing what they do best, and then the advice that we give them is actually applicable. But we don't necessarily have all of the answers, and I think that is a really nice example of that. With FLOWBIO, so I don't know how much you guys know about it, obviously just a brief introduction there, but what we're able to do now is real-time analysis of sweat rate and sweat sodium losses, which will push automatically through to your phone or to your Garmin, to your headset or to your watch, and hopefully enable you to make decisions, particularly in longer races or team sports half-time, like accurate decisions on what you should be putting back in your body. So we're really hopeful that this kind of wearable technology actually provides a bit more of a full circle, where we can actually say you've lost X and it would be recommended that you then take Y. But obviously perhaps it's slightly more straightforward with sodium losses than it is with very complicated blood glucose in different people. But yeah, I think the idea that we can get all of the devices on the athletes that are needed and that our athletes are interested in, that we can actually collect really, really good quality data that is as good as lab tech, but you can do it in the field, is something that really, really excites me.
Just add something to that. I think that's what will happen with it. So if you think about if we've been cycling for a period of time, I ran fairly competitively back, 80s when I was 3. And I go back then, and we had the first polar heart rate monitors, and all the information all came from cross-country skiing. It was archaic, and at that point there was only, you'd be far too young to remember this, there was one carb drink, Isostar. So it was Isostar and these Finnish heart rate monitors. And now, most cyclists, entry-level bikes have got power meters on them. Like 10 years ago, it was niche. 15 years ago, it was out there. So I think what you're going to find was probably in the next 5 years, you'll have a head unit that'll be able to tell you your drug in real time, because, you know, your CDA of, you know, you're sat upright, you're going slower, tack down, how much carb you need and how much electrolyte you need. I think that is going to be very rare, because you think 10 years ago, heart rate, power, left-right balance, that was niche. Now it's on every bike. You know, you can buy a power meter for 300 quid. Heart rate monitors. Does anybody ride with that heart rate monitor these days? And I think that's the way it's going to go. But I think you've got unfinished tech with regards, in my experience, and it would be cool if you're going down and say, have 20 grams of carbs, have X amount of electrolyte, tuck your head down. You're going to go 3 minutes. Your legs are that. I think is where we're going, but we're not there yet.
I think we have time for a couple more questions. Yes. Yes.
What about recovery? I mean, I know we're not meant to eat sort of protein within 20 minutes, but you know, we're not always in a position to have something right there. Like you have a protein with a lovely protein shake, good to go. So you know, if you're just a amateur rider, now you're finishing a ride, what's the best thing you can have within that kind of crucial window to make sure you're ready to go the next day?
If you can't hear at the back, the question is around recovery and really, you know, what's the optimal kind of recovery strategy, I suppose.
That's good. I would say I always back myself. I have a number of things. So if you're going to be evangelical, you sit down and have a proper meal high in protein. I always have recovery shakes, as in those things, commercial products that you buy. At the moment, I'm using HealthSpan Elite product, that a protein drink I have. So if I'm going to come in from a ride and I've got to go and do the school run, or I've got to jump on a conference call, I will not die in a ditch over having a shake. Or any shop within 5 minutes here, you're going to get a quart protein yogurt, 15 grams of protein. You can buy those everywhere. Every single corner shop is now selling protein yogurts or protein yogurt drinks. So just get something down your neck and don't be, I need to have steamed organic chicken with some brown rice. Listen, it's better to get a yogurt down your neck, or, you know, if you're packing your kit, just have some sachet or 20 grams of protein mixture, and then eat proper food as soon as you can. We'll see it with elite athletes. They'll finish, they'll be hyper, you know, they'll be full of carbs and caffeine and bicarb and God knows what else. And they don't want to eat. So we will literally protein shake, get it down your neck, and then as soon as you're ready to eat. And for me, again, I quite often will be training, because I always procrastinate, might have all day, but I will have a shake or a yogurt, protein yogurt. I think protein yogurts are probably, for me, it's just a good, easy way of getting them in. They're inexpensive, and you know, that's probably as good a place to start. Protein yogurt and a banana would be my view, if you can get nothing else. You buy one 5 minutes from here.
Yeah, I'd add to that. I generally have like a 2-phase recovery strategy for athletes that's pretty much non-negotiable. The phase 1 is usually a drink, because it's easy, and as you know, adrenaline suppresses your appetite, so a lot of athletes just will say that they're not hungry after exercise, but that's a real problem, particularly if you're working, say, with track and field athletes, where they might be racing again in 3 hours' time, where recovery is so important, because it's also preparing for the next exercise session as well. But you know, with cycling, you might just have overnight to recover, so every minute counts, because you also need to sleep. So kind of this 2-phase approach, which is just get a drink in you, or a yogurt, or if you have the ability to chuck a yogurt in a NutriBullet with a banana and some cherries for some nice antioxidants as well, then that's really beneficial. And as long as you get that in you as soon as possible, so ideally, you know, within that 20 minutes, half an hour, then I'm much more relaxed about when that good quality meal comes. You know, ideally it's within another hour and a half, 2 hours, which is actually quite feasible for most people to get home to cook a decent meal, or to get back to the competition hotel, or, you know, if they're lucky enough to have Alan, then it's probably prepped and ready to go. But for most of us, we have to go home and cook it. So as long as we've had that phase 1, which is super easy, and yeah, it can be a powder, but just remember the powders don't have all the additional good stuff. And that's why if you have the opportunity to chuck in milk or yogurt into your NutriBullet with your fruit and your all those great antioxidants which are going to help you recover, then that's ideal.
Yeah. The other one as well is that I know I'm a fancy pants chef, and we've got unlimited resources when we're working. A packet of pre-cooked rice, a tin of tuna, and some chopped up avocado and some salad. Again, you go and buy it across the road there. That has basically got everything you need. So if you can, you know, you can always have a tin of tuna and some pre-cooked rice. You pick up an avocado anywhere and some salad. That's protein, carbs, and fat. You don't need to be slaving over a stove for 45 minutes or an hour to get some good, nutritious sort of food back in you. So. That would be, that would be the advice. Just, yeah, be sensible about it.
Okay, sure.
Just last question, sorry.
Okay.
Do you have any advice on hydration before a race or during a race? Especially, for example, in a marathon, it's much more difficult. You cannot carry water with electrolytes. And some people don't like salt tablets, so is there anything that you would recommend?
Jas, can you hear at the back there? Okay, sorry. Can I, you know what, let me pass the microphone around. Could you, there you go.
Oh, it's for me. Oh, you didn't hear my question. I said that if you have any recommendation for hydration strategy before a race, and if you could recommend as well, like for example on a marathon, because you cannot stop and have electrolyte tablets. What would you recommend if you are prone to have cramps, which I do?
It's a really great question, and it can be such a struggle. And unless you really think about it and plan it out, then it will be the demise of your performance. So I would say practice, practice, practice. The amount of times I would have athletes practice running at high speed to a table to pick up a drink. I'm sure you've probably seen the videos where it goes wrong with even the professionals. But a missed drink station is a missed opportunity that will have a potentially catastrophic impact on performance down the line. So practice picking up a cup, practice picking up a bottle. You might look a bit ridiculous, just set up a little stool by your house and then just do laps. And also practice drinking, because it's actually very difficult to swallow fluid when you're breathing really heavily. But practicing does really, really help. So loop that in. I mean, if you're able to do, like, if you're doing a trail marathon or something, then wear the backpack and practice with that as well. With regards to how much you should have beforehand, that's highly individual. Basically, you want to be in a state of euhydration, which is this balance between not being dehydrated and not being overhydrated. Obviously, the negatives of being overhydrated is that you're potentially going to need to stop to go for a wee, which is obviously going to have an impact on time, and it's a faff. But if you start off dehydrated, then you're potentially putting yourself at a disadvantage, because we already know it's going to be really hard for you to take that on during. The other top tip would probably be to find out who the supplement company is that's sponsoring that marathon, and practice with that fluid and see what would be available. And you can usually find all that information on the website. So you might be aware that there's going to be a carbohydrate drink option or an electrolyte drink option, or you might just realise that there's just going to be water, in which case you need to be best prepared. So some of the ways that you could get that electrolyte and carbohydrate on when you know you're only going to really manage a couple of sips is to use gels, and then know where your feed stations are going to be. So 1 kilometre coming into your feed station, take your gel, because we all know how gross it is after a gel if you can't just rinse with water. So don't go taking it 2 minutes after a feed station where you then have to run for another 20 minutes, half an hour with sticky fingers and a sticky mouth. So just like tactical timing of when you take that carbohydrate gel or whatever it is on board ahead of a water station. So you've now got your fueling strategy in place with the electrolytes built into that gel, and then you've got your quick hydration boost, and you can time that in across the course of a marathon. But there's nice ways that you can figure out how much fluid you need by simply weighing yourself pre and post to see what your sweat rate typically is. Obviously, the flow patch would tell you that if you were to be wearing that as well, which is really helpful. But the logistics of running and drinking is difficult, and even switching bottles on the bike can be difficult. So practice.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I think using either, say, drink or gels to get your carbohydrates in. But again, if you looked at, say, Berlin, for example, they have cups of water. If you've ever tried running at race pace, drinking a cup of water, and you've not practiced it, you might as well just pour it straight up your nose. It's really difficult. So that thing you can practice, but I say practice hitting the table at race pace, or just be self-sufficient, like to have a small bottle. All the companies now do really good sort of trail running bottles that you could have 5 minutes. Oh God, I don't want to carry a bottle, but all you do is top it up. And if you think, well, if you're doing a 3 or a 4 hour marathon, you're going to need X amount of carbohydrate. The other thing to be aware of as well is if you've got a nutritional sponsor of the event, and I've seen this happen. Ironman Bolton a few years ago, my partner was racing the elite race, and you can only have feed stations, and it was sponsored by Gatorade, so the most expensive race in the UK, and the dilution of the carb drink, you'd love this, was determined by the size of the Scout that was making it. So if it was a big Scout, they'd put loads of water in. If it was a little pygmy Scout, it would be like the sugar syrup. And you'd get these athletes going past, so you could see the difference in the colour of the carb drink they were getting. And depending on it would depend which Portaloo they hit on the way back, because that's the other thing to be aware. Unless they're giving you a sealed bottle, you're putting that dilution down. So just don't trust anybody, because the time you get to the start line of it, of a marathon, especially a big city marathon. There's a huge amount of investment, personal, physical, and financial, in getting there. So you use, say, Morton gels, there's 40 grams of carbs in the gel. You could have hydro tabs or sachets in a little backpack, and you could carry potentially a kilo, but my God, that'll pay dividends, because that gets lighter as the race goes on. And if you can get 250 ml bottle, you have 40 grams of carbs in a gel, rinse, maybe drop half electrolyte tab, then the next mile drink that 250 ml with half an electrolyte tab. You've just got to put the onus on yourself, but relying on the volunteers and the product on the side. If you're going to get round, again, if you're jogging around dressed as Batman, cool. But if you want to run it proper, practice at race pace, and they say practice drinking is something, and runners don't do it. Runners are nuts. Like everybody goes out. I've run for years. They do a session on a Tuesday, because that's what you always do. You do a session on a Thursday. We do a long run on a Sunday. Doesn't matter how tired you are, and they go out for 2 hours with no fluid or no carbs. They all do it. Training guys, again, it's an opportunity. Elite runners, of which we both work with elite runners, will practice drinking and eating on it. But yeah, take stuff with you. You get 40 grams of carbs in a gel, easy.
Thanks, Alan. I think we're out of time.
Got another one at the back there.
I tell you what, we're going to stay around at the end. Okay, go on.
Just in addition to what Adam was saying, Morton has a program for America, how many gels and at what point you should take. So
Okay.
if you are a Morton gel fan, definitely gel.
Okay, thanks for that. Great. So we're going to stay around at the end. It is worth saying, in terms of the partnership with Rapha and FLOWBIO, we're very much in the beta stage of our product development. We do have the first devices, but Rapha members will have access to those devices as exclusivity. So it'd be great to, if you stay at the end and come and speak to us. We've got some team members here. Team members, wave your hands. Yeah. Come over. Our CTO, Gio, he's over there. He'll answer any technical questions if you have any technical questions. And it'd be great if you stay around. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Sophie. And yeah, thanks.
Great, thanks.
Okay. Thank you for that. Also, final piece from me, we are crowdfunding, and I'm pleased to say we're overfunding, so we've hit 100% of our target. We are backed by some leading VCs. VCs that have backed Planet X, they've backed DeepMind, so we've got a really good bunch of investors behind us, and now we've got a lot of public support. So if you do want to jump on board and get involved in our journey, Doug, can you put the link back up? No? You can't do it? You can't get there? Okay. You can find us. Just crowdcube/FlowBio, I think it is. But come and speak to us at the end if you're interested in getting involved with us, making an investment. I'll happily convince you to give me your money. Okay, thanks. Let's do it. Okay, let's do it. Okay. And stay hydrated.